Rudy Giuliani really puts it on the line in the two following podcasts. He speaks to a real whistleblower who has enough information to put a former U.S. vice president and his son in prison for the rest of their lives. In the second video, he talks about the $5.3 billion in foreign aid, your tax money, that's missing. These videos are reposted here as a public service.
Hello again. This is Rudy Giuliani, and I'm here with Rudy Giuliani Common Sense. It's our purpose to bring to bear the principle of common sense and rational discussion to the issues of our day. America was created at a time of great turmoil, tremendous disagreements, anger, hatred. And it was a book written in 1776 that guided much of the discipline of thinking that brought to us the discovery of our freedoms, of our God-given freedoms. It was Thomas Paine's Common Sense, written in 1776, one of the first American bestsellers, in which Thomas Paine explained by rational principles the reason why these small colonies felt the necessity to separate from the gigantic Kingdom of England and the King of England. He explained their inherent desire for liberty, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and he explained it in ways that were understandable to the people, to all the people, not just to the educated upper class. Because the desire for freedom is classless. The desire for freedom adheres in the human mind and in the human soul. Today we face another time of turmoil, of anger, and very, very serious partisan division. This is exactly the time we should consult our history. Look at what we've done best in the past and see if we can't use some of that to help us now. We understand that they created the greatest country in the history of the world, the greatest democracy, a country that has taken more people out of poverty than any other country on earth. They weren't perfect men and women, and neither are we. But a great deal of the reason for America's constant ability to self-improve is because we're able to reason, we're able to talk, we're able to analyze. We are able to apply our God-given common sense. So let's do it. Today, we have a very, very special guest. He's here live. You've seen him in previous episodes, and you've seen him elsewhere because he's been a witness in this matter, and a very important one. Because remember, I described him as the witness that spans the whole situation from 2014 up to the present. He just happened to be in positions where he found out a lot of information. And as I said to him before, he has a very special quality of integrity. And when he saw that these things weren't right, he wouldn't go along with them. And he's willing to have the courage to speak out about it. So this is Andriy Teleshenko. Many of you have written in and tweeted and texted about how impressed you were with his testimony. We're not going to go over that testimony, all of it, because there are a few things I want to clarify about it and a few things that are new that I want his opinion about. So, Andriy, first of all, I know this will sound partisan, but I'm trying to get at the facts. The situation that we see with Biden, the situation we're going to talk about in a little while, the $5.3 billion that's unaccounted for, yep, from like 2014, 2015 to 2017. Some of the other things, the fact that Ukraine was the largest contributor to the Clinton Foundation.
Ukrainian oligarchs.
Yeah, not the people, the oligarchs, yeah, which probably money they stole from the Ukrainian people.
That's what they are, oligarchs, yeah.
Was there a special relationship between the Ukrainian oligarchs, the Ukrainian crooks, organized criminals, whatever you want to call them, and the Democratic Party in general, and the Obama administration in particular?
Of course, it was going back between 10 years ago when Yanukovych era, with the guy who fled to Russia, they were working with the Clinton Foundation, they were working with the Clintons, they were working with the Obama administration. The money that we talked about in Ukraine when you came, the $7.4 billion with the Franklin Templeton Fund, everything else, and going back today, they're still using Ukraine to fight the political war in the United States. And if they would love Ukraine, they would never talk about it. They would say, yes, investigate it. Let's show we never did anything in Ukraine. We will not use this country in this political war in the United States. Let's get it over with. They didn't do that. They still kept quiet. They're blocking everything that's being done right now and continuing their war in right now in Washington to fight for the presidential seat.
And they had a relationship with both Yanukovych,
yes, Poroshenko,
and then Poroshenko when he took over, they established the same.
They basically put him as the
foundation.
president after the Maidan, after the Revolution of Dignity, when people came out to basically protest against the pro-Russian vector of the country, and they put Poroshenko afterwards to become this president. I was part of his team. I was part of his government, and I worked there, knowing that we're trying to go for a pro-Western vector, but we didn't know that we were used at that time.
And that relationship, that special relationship with the Democrat Party, does that exist even today after 2 or 3 years of Trump?
After you started your investigation, it's got weaker. That I can tell you. I'm serious. It's got weaker because the U.S. Embassy doesn't have that much influence over those pro-liberal organizations or politicians. They are keeping quiet, but they're still out there. They're still talking. Pro-Soros organizations are still out there. Pro-democratic organizations are still talking, but they got much quieter after your investigations became public.
Now, you say Soros, George Soros. What's his role? What's his role in all? His name keeps coming up with ANTAC and with the ambassador and with his case getting fixed.
He goes way back to 1993 when he came into Ukraine and started his Open Society Foundation, the Renaissance. And that's when they started to fund these NGOs for a better future, as they could want for the Ukrainian people. But then they got politicized and used all those people they funded to go against people who did not support the ideas of liberal views, pro-democratic views of the Democratic Party, etc., etc. Anybody who did not support those views, they would destroy them politically, because those organizations will become much powerful within the last 20 years. And they basically went against all the politicians, government officials who went against them, the prosecutor general, judges, politicians, members of parliament, ministers, everybody were destroyed by ANTAC and pro-Soros organizations.
So they were afraid. I mean, the political figures in Ukraine were afraid of them.
Yes.
And the main organization was the Anti-Corruption Center?
Yes, that's right now.
ANTAC.
ANTAC, that's what it's being called.
And that was funded by Soros and USAID, right?
Yes, U.S. taxpayers' money.
And Soros.
Yes, and Soros, Open Society Foundation, yes.
So let's just clarify a few of the things that you talked about earlier. One of the most important things that you testified to, in which you are corroborated almost word for word by Mr. Kulyuk and Mr. Kolonitsky, who I also interviewed separately, is the January, I believe it's 19th,
Yeah.
2016 meeting. But what you brought me today is very useful. It is in Ukrainian. We'll get it translated, but I think you can help us with it. This is, and we'll do it like we're in a courtroom. This is Exhibit 1. Your Honor, this is Exhibit 1, marked for identification. Okay. So Exhibit 1 is the letter inviting the prosecutors to the meeting, correct?
Yes, it's the letter from the Department of Justice of the United States and the U.S. Embassy in Kiev inviting Mr. Kholnitsky, for example, the special anti-corruption prosecutor, to come to Washington and for trading purposes, to come to meetings with the FBI, Department of Justice, White House, etc., etc. So this is the first letter.
So the purpose of the meeting was to train Mr. Kolonitsky,
Mr. Sitnik.
Mr. Kulyuk, Mr. Sitnik, and who were they? Well, let me identify them so it's easier. Mr. Sitnik ran NABU.
Yes, he was the head of the anti-corruption.
Which were the corruption investigators. Mr. Kolonitsky ran SAP, which were the prosecutors.
Special anti-corruption.
And Mr. Kuliuk was the #1 deputy in the Prosecutor General's office.
Yes.
And it seems to me the guy has done the most work in investigating this case.
He's a professional investigator. That's what he does.
Right. It seems rather dogged, the kind of investigator I like.
Yeah.
So they came to the meeting. Now, what was your role? What was your role in this meeting?
The ambassador, Chelly, assigned me to organize their trip and their meetings here in Washington together with the Department of Justice, as I was the former assistant to the Prosecutor General and I knew that field. And more than anybody else at the embassy, that's why I was organizing and I was responsible for their visit to Washington from day one, from their arrival to their departure.
So listed as, I think their #1 meeting is the meeting at the White House.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, that's the meeting on January 19, 2016, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m., National Security Council, White House.
We'll show this on the screen so people can see it. But these are two of the names here are is this in Ukrainian or Russian?
Ukrainian, yeah.
So the two names are in Ukrainian, but if you could translate those two names, it would be very, very helpful.
It's Eric Chermanella and Liz Zentis.
And who were they?
They were representatives of Biden and the National Security Council working on Ukraine and on Ukrainian issues, and they were the ones who were hosting that meeting.
Oh, they were. They were the more or less the official hosts.
Yes, they were official hosts of that meeting in the White House, and they were the ones representing Biden in that White House
meeting. And did they speak during the meeting?
Of course, Eric Chermanella and Liz Zentis spoke, asked questions, and asked about the allegedly Paul Manafort and the Party Regents investigations for our authorities to investigate when they come back to Ukraine.
Was there such an investigation at the time?
At that time, no.
So they, in essence, instigated the investigation of Paul. They instigated a criminal investigation in Ukraine.
Yes,
and that was at the request of Eric Chermanella
and Liz Zentis. Yes.
And basically, how did they generally say it? What did they say?
It was a meeting like, look, you have a party of regents, a party which is pro-Russian, which was ousted by the people of Maidan. You have to investigate the party regents and their connections with any American consultants that they were working for the last 5 years. Basically, the only consultant was they working for.
And their main consultant
was Paul Manafort.
Not everyone, but everybody on the inside knew their main consultant was Paul Manafort.
Yes, it was everybody in Ukraine in the political sphere knew that their consultant was Paul Manafort, and so the U.S. Embassy did, and the U.S. government also.
Now, was there a subsequent telephone call with Mr. Kolonitsky when that was made clear?
2 weeks after he came back to Ukraine, Mr. Kolonitsky told me he had a call with the U.S. Embassy in Kiev where they told him directly he has to look into Paul Manafort, and which came out as the Black Ledger in the future. And
then your next, I'm sure there were a lot of other connections, but your next main connection with this that sort of ties it together is your meeting with Chalupa, who was an operative of the DNC.
Yes.
And that meeting, you really didn't know the purpose of that meeting
No.
when you went there. But if I could summarize it, and if you want to add anything to it, fine, please do so. But basically, she asked you to dig up as much dirt as you could on Trump Jr., the Trump campaign, and Paul Manafort.
Yes.
And she outlined to you a scheme not to build a criminal case on Manafort, but a scheme where Manafort was going to be used to destroy Trump's candidacy.
Yes, that's correct.
How did she describe that?
She basically, the meeting was held by embassy officials. Oksana Shridhar, she invited me to that meeting. It was outside the embassy in Leopold's Cafe. Chalupa represented herself as a DNC operative, asking for dirt, any dirt I can find, as you said, on Trump Jr., Paul Manafort.
Was she as direct as that?
Yes.
I mean, dirt.
I want dirt on Trump Jr., Paul Manafort.
So she's asking a foreign national,
a government official,
and foreign national. This is precisely what Donald Trump Jr. was investigated for 2 years, threatened to be indicted because a foreign national came and actually ended up offering nothing.
Yeah.
But she was telling you she wanted dirt.
Yes, to take off Trump from the campaign in the end of September through a Congresswoman, Marcy Kaptur. She said, we're going to have Marcy Kaptur have a committee hearing where Trump, presidential candidate Donald Trump at that time, will be taken off the ballot.
Now we'll take a short break. Welcome back to my interview of Andrei Teleshenko. So that meeting clearly was referring, because she talked about August, September, when they were going to destroy him.
Yes.
It was clearly connected to the so-called Black Ledger.
It was one of the phases that they were supposed to.
And the Black Ledger was purported to be a ledger of the Party of Regions, the party they had asked about, Giuliani and Zentis had asked about, and it had purportedly had bribes in it, and people signed for the bribes.
Yes.
And one of the persons that signed for the bribes, according to this ledger, was Paul Manafort.
Yes.
Now,
allegedly.
Allegedly, and I mean, I've been investigating crime for 50 years. I never remember anybody signing for a bribe. You do not sign for a bribe.
Yeah, you don't sign up for it.
When I asked witnesses, because I asked 4 Ukrainians also, just to check on Manafort's credibility, if that was their signature, they said, number one, we've never seen it before. Number two, it's not my signature. And do I look crazy? Why would I sign for $12,000 in bribes? So it's pretty clear now that it was a forgery.
Plus, it's not a book. It's a couple of pages.
It's pages
combined together.
It's pages with names, numbers, and little
signatures.
Little not quite signatures, but like I will often do RWG, something like that. But it was treated like it was the biggest revelation in the history of the world. And instead of being used for political purposes, it was leaked to the press, correct?
Yes, it was never investigated. It was just leaked to the press directly, basically.
So this was the strategy that Chalupa was talking to you about. It's the strategy that Chiarmella and Zentis put into play. And then finally in August, September, it gets discussed with the press by Mr. Sitnik, who's the head at NABU,
yes,
which turns out to be illegal under Ukrainian law. He's not supposed to talk about investigations. And number two, by Leshchenko, who had been already very vocally anti-Trump.
He was a member of parliament with Poroshenko party, and he was a former connected to ANTAC and pro-Soros organization, Open Society, the Renaissance, and he was basically putting in his Facebook page, "We will nail the coffin on Trump." That's what he was talking about.
For all the investigations and the about Russian collusion with Trump where nothing happened, this is an actual executed plan. And I think Leshchenko says, like Chalupa earlier, this will destroy Trump's candidacy.
Yes, that's what.
Now, it didn't work, but that was the purpose of it.
That was the main first stage of the purpose of what they were supposed to do to destroy presidential candidate Donald Trump.
And when the election was over, did this hatred of Trump, did it subside or did it continue in Ukraine?
First of all, people didn't understand what happened. Then it subsided for a bit. Then it continued with a new wave afterwards with the same people involved. Chalupa still doing it today, talking. You can look at her Twitter. Today
Meaning now, 4 years later.
4 years later, she denied what we talked about in the Politico article. She denied it everywhere else, and she's still doing it today, even though she denied that she did it.
So you were interviewed by Politico, and this created quite a stir after the election and before the inauguration.
Yes.
And in it, you revealed, and people can read it, and so we don't have to go in detail about it, but you revealed the substantial amount of what we now call collusion, right?
Yes.
Between Ukrainians and members of the DNC, members of the embassy.
As a first-hand witness.
As a first-hand witness, including your meetings with Chalupa, Shali,
yes,
and a number of other people who admitted it to you.
Yes.
So what happened to you in Ukraine when that happened?
The article came out in January 11th, a couple of weeks before the inauguration.
Right.
Biden was in Kiev as the vice president, his last tour of Ukraine before he left his post. And the article was given from Biden to Poroshenko that night he was in Kiev. Say, look, you have to get your stuff together. This stuff is coming out. How I know that?
Yeah. How do you know that?
Poroshenko told me that because he called me up to his office through the people I used to work with.
Was that uncommon for him to call you up to his office? Would he call you up to his office
I
normally?
never been to his office before that. I was in the office of the presidential administration with my boss.
But never with him.
Never with him
And
personally.
what did he say to you briefly?
You can imagine a president of a country calling a regular
Yeah, he's
citizen.
a big man too.
A regular citizen to his office and yelling for an hour.
Was he yelling?
Yelling and threatening for an hour, like I'm trying to discredit him personally, that this is against him and his relationship with the United States, even though I never mentioned Poroshenko in the political article before that because I was afraid for my life. I knew if I would mention him, it would go too far. What my main purpose was to get attention and to get it investigated. I mentioned Shelley, the DNC, but never Poroshenko. But he calls me up and he threatens me that he's going to destroy my life politically because I'm a political consultant.
Were you frightened? Were you afraid?
Me?
Yeah.
I said, Mr. President, calm down, please. Let's talk. Don't yell at me. I don't like when people yell at me. So I told him.
Did it help a little? Did it help a little to calm him down?
He actually, after an hour, he actually backed off because for him it was like, for people never tell him to calm down. People
Right.
just usually just listen and do what he says.
Is he someone that people would be afraid he would have them killed?
He's a president. He can do whatever he wants, right?
But I mean, is that a active fear?
It is an
that goes
active
on?
fear.
Yeah,
It
because
is
I
an
mean,
active
many
fear.
people have told me that.
It is an active
including the poisoning of Shokin.
Yes.
that happened.
First of all, he's a player and he's a political player, and he would go anything to get to what he wants to get, to his goal, by any means.
So now this is after the election. This is after Trump becomes president. Was there no effort to try to patch up relationships with Trump?
From what we understand, there was nothing.
And is it true that they did not send an official representative to the inauguration?
Yeah, that's true. There was nobody. It was only Chelly, the one who was.
Shelley was the ambassador who had made a speech against Trump.
Yes,
during
in the
campaign.
Hill article, in a Hill op-ed, a couple months before the elections.
Well, he said Trump was incompetent to be president.
Yes.
So he went, and then this other gentleman named Nazarov.
Nasir, yeah.
He went because he was a Trump supporter, but he went on his own.
He went on his own. He wanted to show that he can get inside the swamp, as he thought at that time, to get inside and have some deals made for Ukraine, but not with Trump, but just overall to show
What
that
happened to him when he came back?
He went to prison.
They put him in prison, right?
Yeah.
Like a phony charge.
Nabu put him in prison. Nabu.
Sitnik.
Yeah. Not even, it was the Nabu, the Democrats, who put him to prison.
That's the kind of connection. The reason I'm asking you this question is that's the kind of insidious connection that the Democratic Party continued to have after Trump was elected.
Yes.
And continue to have to this day?
Yes. Until today, they have the same.
Is it still as strong?
Everything is, I said it's weaker because it got investigated, started to get investigated by you, by the Senate. But after your investigations, they started to be afraid to do actions straightforward. They use right now people like oligarchs like Pinchuk, the guy who gave the money to the Clinton Foundation.
Pinchuk, so we identify him, is the single largest contributor to the Clinton Foundation.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
100 million?
Yeah, up to $100 million.
Right.
Officially, it's around 13, but it's up to 100 million.
And alleged to have made campaign contributions to her.
Of course.
In ways that we...
Which are illegal within the United States law.
Completely, if you could find it, right? So now I'm going to switch topics to a company that hasn't gotten the attention it deserves. Blue Star Strategies, I think it's called.
Yes, it is.
And Blue Star Strategies is a lobbying firm. And it's a Democratic lobbying firm, right?
Yeah. They work.
The people work for Bill Clinton, and they lobby on the Democratic side.
Yes.
Now, all of a sudden, when the deal gets made between Zlochevsky and Biden, and they're going to hire Biden's son as kind of a bribe to Biden to get his protection, Blue Star Strategies is hired by Burisma.
Yes.
And to this day, they're still with Burisma.
Yes.
Correct?
They are their official lobbyists or consultants, how they call it. Because
and Biden, Joe Biden himself, and eventually you work for Blue Star Strategies.
they hired me after I came from working from the embassy. I got hired by them for a year, from 2016 till 2017.
So you had the advantage of their telling you what had happened in the past, and when they would just gossip and
Yes.
And it was Biden asked them to do an audit, an analysis of Burisma, but before his son went on the board.
Yes, that's correct.
And did they do that?
Yes, they did.
And now Burisma
It came out clean.
This is in 2014.
Yes.
It came out clean, and this is when their owner Zlochevsky had fled the country.
And
He
had
was alleged to have taken billions with him,
$5 billion.
$5 billion, and it had become now quite clear that when he was Minister of Ecology or whatever he was giving himself the licenses.
Yeah. Basically,
Many licenses.
For gas development in Ukraine, yes.
And they found that he was acting legitimately.
Yes, even though there was a criminal case opened in 2014, beginning of the year, in April 2014, and then 3 other reopened to get money back from London, $23 million.
Now, to everybody else in the Ukraine, including our embassy, because George Kent has testified to this, wasn't Burisma and Zlochevsky considered to be among the crookedest operations in Ukraine? Like,
yes.
Notorious.
Yes, one of the largest money fund. They fund a lot of money from Ukraine.
So any person on the street, if you said Zlochevsky or Burisma, would know that it was a crooked company.
Yeah.
So they produced this audit, 1 or 2?
I think there were more than one, but
You think there was a sanitized one?
yes, and then there was
Burisma's wonderful, and then just so they would know the pitfalls, a real one about all the laundering and.
like they do in the mafia, the book, the black book, the white book. They show
But
to the public.
this won them the contract, right?
Yes, that's when they got hired by Burisma officially to work with them and represent them through all means. After Hunter Biden comes in, they come in and they represent them until today as their official lobbyists.
So after the deed was done, and Shokin was fired by Biden, got him fired. You at this point now you were back in
Yes, I was in Ukraine.
back in Kiev, and you were working for Blue Star Strategies.
I was in Kiev when Shokin got fired. I was in Washington. Then I came back.
I'm talking about the aftermath of it,
Yes.
like in May and June.
Yes, I was already in
of
Kiev.
2016. And one of your jobs was to help them get meetings with the
Prosecutor General.
Prosecutor General's office, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So, what were the purpose? And these meetings were right after Shokin
Got fired.
was fired, but hadn't quite been replaced yet. There was an interim.
There was an acting prosecutor general between.
What
both
was the
sides.
purpose of the meetings?
To talk the prosecutor's office into closing the case, the criminal case against Burisma, to show that they're going to lose the case and to show that there's no worthly. They don't have to just pursue. They just have to let it go, and it's going to be closed.
So these are the letters. Just want you to look at them. So when we show them to people, these are the letters that they sent, asking for the for.
For the meeting with the acting prosecutor general, and then
What was the date? Is there a date on that one?
March 29th.
Yep. So I have them out of order a bit. This is March 23rd.
Yeah, there's around March.
This is all
Beginning of
in the
March.
wake of. In fact, it wasn't until the end of March that Shokin was officially fired by
Yes.
the Parliament. Right?
Yes, that's correct.
And here's a March 23rd letter thanking you for setting up a meeting with the Prosecutor General. Wasn't there a meeting in which they apologized for having defamed Shokin?
Yes, John Solomon wrote about that, and where basically they apologized for
So now-
going against the prosecutor general.
You worked in the Prosecutor General's office. You worked in the embassy. Just tell us about. And there are corrupt people in Ukraine. Would you describe Shokin as corrupt?
No, I would not. He's not as corrupt as anybody else. Nobody was talked about. Only Shokin.
Right.
There's other ministers.
But was he notoriously corrupt?
No,
Was he doing his job in a corrupt way?
he was doing his job.
He was actually doing his
Maybe
job.
people around him were not as well mannered or corrupt.
So that
but
was
there
a-
was other people. There was
Now, who manufactured that?
other ministers, and nobody did anything about
Who
them.
manufactured that excuse for firing him? That he was corrupt.
It was the State Department, ANTAC people. It was the Democrats, and basically, and Joe Biden. He wanted him out.
And the NGOs, right?
And ANTAC,
And-
yeah.
yeah.
They basically
But
they were
an-
protesting.
the NGOs are almost like a little body of their own.
And also Leshchenko, the guy he was talking about how Shokin is corrupt, the guy who was talking about getting Trump out of the election and going against Paul Manafort. They were going and protesting every day in the prosecutor's office and saying how Shokin is corrupt, how he has to get fired, even though he just started doing his job. He wasn't there for a year.
So here are the rest of the letters. I'll just show them quickly. We can look them over. We'll put them in the website
Yeah,
so people can.
This is
read
a letter for them writing to the Department of Justice and Prosecutor's Office, how they're going to arrange meetings.
So basically, what they're doing is they're trying to get the case dismissed.
Yes.
They're trying to complete the corrupt bribe,
Yeah.
but it actually doesn't get dismissed.
Oh.
It doesn't get dismissed until right before the election, and
Around October, end of October,
because
November.
maybe known to them, maybe not, Poroshenko was kind of holding this up so he could shake down Zlochevsky for some
money.
real money,
Yeah.
which he got.
Yes, he did.
Poroshenko was paid off in this case.
Of course. There's other witnesses who could prove it.
And is that the reason why there's such reluctance in Ukraine to really dig into this case, and that it's going to uncover Poroshenko and a lot of other people that got money?
There's a lot of people. If this case gets uncovered the real way, a lot of people are going to go down politically and they're going to go to jail. That's what everybody's afraid of. Starting from Poroshenko and then with the Democrats here in Washington.
So the last subject I'm going to ask you about just came up a short while ago with with two things. First of all, the disclosure of this document called the Accounting Chamber Decision of 19 December 2017. You've seen this, you've read it.
Yes.
It basically says that $5.3 billion, that's real money, $5.3 billion is not accounted for. Whole host of reasons. Some of it is actual money laundering. Some of it is failure to list it. Some of it they just can't find it. Some of it is $4 million was given to the Prosecutor General's office, and instead of going to the Prosecutor General's office, it went to an NGO in Italy.
Yeah.
And
this is money, U.S. taxpayers' money.
this is all, well, 3 million of this.
$3 billion.
Right. I can't even comprehend the amount. 3 billion of this is American taxpayer dollars,
Yeah.
right?
Taxpayer and other European taxpayers' money.
So, but you didn't even know about this until recently.
This document, no, it's kept private, even though it should be a public document.
This is a devastating document.
And nobody talks about it.
The big question in the United States always is, how effective is our foreign aid? President Trump ran on straightening out foreign aid. I imagine had this document been known before the election, Trump would have won, by 3% more or 4% more. I mean, because it would prove what Trump had always been saying, that our foreign aid, we got to be careful about it because it isn't going to help the people.
No.
A lot of it is being diverted for private purposes.
Yes.
So there are many, many cases here to be investigated. But when it came out, it wasn't investigated, right?
No.
It was covered up.
The police covered it up and because they were pressured by the U.S. Embassy in Kiev.
Yes, I spoke to one very, very distinguished gentleman, Mr. Kuliak, I can say that, who says that they were pressured twice not to go forward with this. And then finally the president said, drop it.
Even though this is an official document from a body which is part of the government, which is a constitutional body which controls basically all the budgets in Ukraine and coordinates how the funding is being spent, and nobody talks about it.
So they didn't want it to go forward. The embassy didn't, because they're implicated in this, aren't they? They're the ones who decide which NGOs get the money.
Yes.
And they give it to their pals.
Yes.
And their pals are all left-wing.
Liberal, left-wing, pro-Soros, pro-Democrat.
Not a penny to a moderate or conservative group.
If you're a conservative, you're not even welcome in the U.S. Embassy in Kiev right now. I used to help the U.S. Embassy a lot during Maidan, prior Maidan, when we were opposition to Yanukovych. And after Maidan, and when Trump was going for president, I showed my views to support President Donald Trump.
And you were
blocked from the embassy, saying we don't want to deal with it.
And many other people.
There's a lot.
And in some cases, visas denied by the ambassador.
Yeah, hundreds of people were blocked, and that's how the relationship between our countries start to soar.
Well, the last thing I'm going to ask you about is just one example of that $5.3 billion, which has resulted in criminal charges being filed. And it involves the Ukrainian Network for People with HIV/AIDS. It involves the Anti-Corruption Center, ANTAC, which is the company that the ambassador asked Lutsenko to drop the case on.
Yes.
And it involves NABU. NABU is the National Anti-Corruption Bureau. So who ran the Ukrainian network for people with HIV/AIDS?
It was Dmitry Sherembey. It's a pal of Shabudin, who's the director of ANTAC.
So Dmitry Sherembey started this AIDS network. Sounds very nice, like a very nice thing to do.
Yeah.
However, he was an unusual guy to start it. He had spent time in jail, 4 different times actually, for stealing, for grand larceny. He had other convictions. So he was a convict. And he starts the AIDS program, and therefore is entrusted with hundreds of millions of dollars.
$142 million.
Well, $142 million is questionable.
Yeah, that's the one.
But the budget is much more than that.
It's much more than that. It's millions and millions of dollars.
Over the years.
Yes.
And at the very beginning, there was some question about his overcharging for medicines and kicking back and laundering money. And one of the reasons for setting up the Anti-Corruption Center, ANTAC, one of the reasons was to take a look at operations like the AIDS Center.
Yeah, to fight corruption.
Okay, so who put together the Anti-Corruption Center, ANTAC?
Sherembey and Shabunin.
So Sherembey and Shabunin were the founders of the organization that was going to audit Sherembey.
Yes.
That's very convenient.
And
the fox guarding the chicken coop, right?
It goes worse afterwards.
I know it gets worse, but we don't want to give away the secret right away. Now, this organization was funded by this ANTAC organization, funded by, once again, George Soros.
One of his organizations, Open Society Foundation, the Renaissance in Ukraine.
And by U.S. taxpayers,
USAID.
Was the AIDS Center similarly funded?
Yes, it was the same funded organization by Soros.
And Soros had a lot of control over this.
Yes, he had the most control involving what was being done in these organizations.
And this Anti-Corruption Center, kind of like the next one we're going to talk about, it's really a contradiction, right? I mean, it became a corruption center.
Yeah, it was done for good deeds. In the beginning, the founding of it was a good idea, but afterwards it became corrupt itself by taking money from the outside, money from oligarchs, and doing dirty work.
And then there was a third organization called NABU, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine,
Yes.
which was actually a new organization set up by George Kent.
He was the godfather.
Being pushed very hard by ANTAC also.
Yes, and the U.S. Embassy, George Kent.
Which I should tell you is like a pattern for Soros in other countries. And this thing turned into being totally corrupt.
Yeah, it's not doing what it has to do. And the people who are on the board members of that NABU, who have to oversee their work, are Sherembey and Shabunin.
So, Sherembey runs the HIV Center.
Yes.
That for a number of years has all these questions about stealing money in one way or another, including cases that were brought against them and then dropped by the prosecutor general, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And he's an ex-convict.
Yes, 4 times.
So they put together a private organization to help oversee it, and they put Sherembey on the board.
Yes.
So he's going to oversee himself.
Yes.
And then they have a government organization that's all new, nice and clean, anti-corruption, and they put a convict on the board, Sherembey. So Sherembey is going to overlook himself from the government point of view and from the private point of view.
Yes, and he also decides who is being hired by NABU while being on the board of directors.
And the result of that is in 7 or 8 years of operation, where there were questions constantly about their money and cases brought against them, nothing ever went forward against them.
Nothing ever.
And did ANTAC or NABU ever write even a report about them?
No, 0, nothing. They're as clean as a whistle, even though they basically not only stole money, but they were their criminal activity on getting medicine and never buying the medicine in which the money was given.
So we can't go into all of the details of this, but basically, one of the cores of their fraud was they would buy medicine for people they didn't treat people with AIDS.
No.
They would do public advocacy, and they spent a fortune on public advocacy, big parties, lots of liquor, traveling first class, and then just missing money just missing.
The money was never.
And then with medicines, they would go to companies. There are a list of 5 companies, all of whom have a record of overcharging.
Yes.
all of whom have a record of kicking back.
Yes.
And they would spend much more money on the medicine than they would have to spend. And that money was the excess that would be laundered, passed out.
Put into pockets, sent to other companies, smaller companies, and laundered to their own pockets.
And finally, the complaint was filed by two people. One was Mr. Durkash, who we've interviewed and we're going to interview again, who has great deal of knowledge of this. But another one was by Mr. Philandosh, who was a former member of parliament, and he put together a question and answer thing, and then he put together a chart that lists many. Have you had a chance to look at that chart?
Yeah. It lists all the companies they work for, how much money they accounted for from each company.
So I should tell you that this is one of 20 cases that are. This is the first one to result in a criminal charge.
Yes.
Mr. Shabunin and Mr. Sharanbey are now charged with multiple crimes.
Some from 7 to 12 years in prison, if they get convicted.
And it appears to be the first of many, because there are another 20 cases.
But this one got into the public eye, and hopefully it will stay that way. This case will be investigated.
Because Antac played a big role in digging up dirt on Donald Trump and Paul Manafort, didn't it?
Yes, they were.
And they had a case against them, and Lutsenko was forced to drop that case.
Yes.
By Marie
Yovanovitch.
Yovanovitch, right? By Marie Yovanovitch. Well, this has been very helpful. I'm sorry we had to kind of summarize it so fast, because this is all very interesting, but it does give our viewers a chance to get a sense of the overview. Just two questions that just bother me. How did the Ukraine become the biggest contributor to the Clinton Foundation? You're certainly not the richest country in the world. You've been going through terrible times. Yovanovitch left you with $800,000 in the bank. $800,000 in the bank.
Yeah.
How could Ukraine be the one that was the biggest contributor to the phony, crooked Clinton Foundation?
Because the oligarchs who contributed, Mr. Pinchuk, they wanted to clean themselves up. You know how the Democrats call Pinchuk inside their inner circle? The PG-rated oligarch.
The what?
The PG-rated oligarch.
What does that mean?
A good one. He's a good oligarch. Everybody else is bad, but he's the good one. Even though he stole the same way as anybody else. They contribute to clean their reputation up within the eyes of the United States government. And they thought they had the power in the pockets of the former presidents of the United States, former administrations.
So they were giving her that money when she was Secretary of State also.
Yeah, for years and years before.
In many ways, for the same reason that they corrupted Biden. They needed favor with the Secretary of State.
Yeah.
And in fact, originally, the way some of the witnesses describe it, Zlochevsky thought he was buying both Biden and John Kerry.
Yes.
But John Kerry's stepson pulled out of the picture because he kind of figured out how corrupt it was.
He went out really fast.
What's the effect of President Trump's approach now to Ukraine, which is basically to call out the corruption, not to be afraid to do it, to point out that Americans are involved? So we're not lecturing you. We're just as involved in this as we have as many bad people involved as you are. What's the reaction to President Trump doing this?
People on the street, they fully support it. They say this is what America, as our friend, needed to do years and years before. Not teach us how to fight corruption, but work together on fighting corruption on both ends, because we know that not everybody's perfect, but people support the idea of Donald Trump to investigate it together and to fight who is corrupt. The government is afraid right now to do it because they're all backed by Soros. Zelensky, unfortunately, is afraid to investigate, but hopefully things will change. But the people, millions of Ukrainians, support President Donald Trump's idea to do this.
And Zelensky needs the most support he can get.
Yes.
In order to be courageous enough to hopefully set up a joint task force.
Yeah.
Let's just find out who they are and let's end it.
It's the better for the development of relationship between Ukraine and the United States. We turn this page over with this investigation. We'll have a better future, better relationship. Trump, anybody else who becomes president, Trump Jr., who knows? We'll have a better investigation. We'll have a better future with our relationship with Ukraine and the United States.
And what is being done to your people is horrendous. $800,000 left in the bank.
Yeah.
All their money was stolen once.
Yeah, we had no money, and we
Now $5.3 billion is headed your way to help people with AIDS. If a quarter of it got to the people, it's a lot.
we would have a better developing country. But
So America and other countries are putting up the money for a good purpose. And then when they find out something like this, so I can't thank you enough for being courageous enough to point these things out, because they're so important to your country and to mine. And I know the crooked media in my country tries to cover this up because, same reason, Democrat.
yeah, they tried to make me a Russian spy.
But I think we're getting through. I think we're getting through. And if we and I would say you're one of the primary reasons for it, Andrei Teleshenko. You're a good man.
Thank you, sir.
And you're a brave man. And I really respect two things: integrity and courage. You got both of them.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Without you, we would be not here.
Thank you,
sir.
Thank you. Hello, I'm back with Rudy Giuliani Common Sense, and today we have the honor of having with us a member of the Rada, the Parliament of Ukraine, Mr. Andrei Dirkash. You saw Mr. Dirkash interviewed in the last two episodes. Those were interviews done in Kyiv, but he's now in New York, and there are some new developments that we'd like him to discuss with us. That are very, very recent and will have a great impact on what's going on. So I want to thank Mr. Dirkash for coming, and I want to thank him particularly for his interest in what turns out to be the expenditure of a good deal of American money. This is something that's in the interest of both the people of the United States and the people of Ukraine. So, Mr. Dirkash, you're also involved with a radio and television station, correct? Previous, not now. Okay, and how long were you in that business?
About 15 years.
So it's fair to say that you.
My family involved in this business.
I see. And for the last 20 years, you've been a member of
Parliament. 20 years.
20 years. And tell us what you focus on, what your specialty is, what you're chairman of.
The majority of time, I used to work in the budget committee of Ukraine. It's questions involved with budgeting, loans, debts, and the transition of money within the budget of Ukraine. And also, last time I told you that we were involved in the involvement of the foreign assistance aid to Ukraine. And you were amazed at how much money is being spent and it's not being accounted for. We continued our investigation, and today I passed to you the other part of the documents. On one of those documents, a criminal case is opened already today. The other documents we have to work with together with both sides.
The part of your concern, I'm sure, and this is a document you gave to me back in 3-4 months ago when we were in Kyiv. There was an accounting chamber decision on 19 December 2017 that was quite dramatic. It found about $5.3 billion that in various ways wasn't properly accounted for. Foreign aid that wasn't accounted for. So is that something that you're looking at now in general, or the foreign aid, and was it spent accountably? Was it spent corruptly?
$4 billion out of that amount is the money of the U.S. taxpayers.
So of the 5.3 billion, that's
approximately
three is American.
3 billion is American. And what I tried to explain and to show that in the last 15 years there was a huge corruption scheme done to diversify the technical assistance to Ukraine. The system is made in such a way that close relatives and people close to the USAID and to the US government receive the funds.
Right.
Previous officials or acting officials.
So that report of the $5.3 billion that was, let's say in general, not accounted for properly, that was never really investigated fully. When we discussed it, you told me that there was a lot of interference by the American embassy in doing that investigation. Is that investigation being done now?
Right now we started investigations in some of the cases that I gave to you and transferred to you. The majority of those investigations are done by journalists. And right now one of the investigations is done by the National Police of Ukraine of the ineffective and insufficient of the transfer of funds to people who are sick with AIDS.
Okay, so there are many cases to be investigated, but there is one.
I passed you a chart with 20 cases that you have right now, which are needed to be investigated.
Right. So you were showing me a chart. This chart you showed me yesterday, and we went over it. These are 20
cases.
How many? 20?
20 cases which are needed to be investigated because of some of the illegal activities in them. And in some of the cases there's no reports on the cases.
So these are cases that are going to be investigated, or they are being investigated?
Those are the cases that we are trying to get investigated right now.
Now there's one particular case where you filed a complaint with regard to that case.
It's a case about the supplying of people who are affected with AIDS, and which is a $133 million case. There were also a sign of effective companies or small companies which were in this case.
So this was
the documents on how it was ineffectively investigated and how the ineffectively was spent we gave to the National Police of Ukraine, and today they opened a criminal case.
So let's get the right title for this investigation. This is the investigation that involves the National Center for HIV/AIDS. Is that
Right.
And is this the formal document that initiated the investigation? These here?
No.
And that's one that you filed. That's the document that you filed.
Yes, these are documents. They are in open source.
They're in open.
They are on my Facebook page.
So they're laid out on your Facebook page, and this involves two individuals who ran this center. Can you tell us their names?
The journalist investigators sought out a scheme that was built by Sharonbay and Shabunin. There was a system built that there was supposed to be some sort of anti-corruption system, which is allegedly controlling the distribution of funds to the other organization. And in the result, through the organization of people who are affected with AIDS, a lot of money was laundered.
And the name of the organization was the All Ukrainian Network of People Living with HIV/AIDS.
And the head of this organization was Sharon Bay, who was 4 times convicted prior.
And what was the connection of Mr. Shabunin to that?
Both Sharon Bay and Shabunin were the head of the organization, anti-corruption organization. And you can find in open sources in Wikipedia of they're both cooperating on anti-corruption initiatives.
So the National Center, let's call it the National Center for AIDS, so we shorten it a bit. The National Center for AIDS was run by Mr. Sherenby, and the Anti-Corruption Center was run by Shabunin. And the Anti-Corruption Center, one of its responsibilities was to keep watch over this money.
And also to that, Sharon Bey is the board member of the Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, NABU, where Sitnik is the head.
I see. So he has a great deal of influence over the investigators who are specially designated to investigate corruption.
They don't even keep secret their ties with the U.S. Embassy in Kiev.
And what is Mr. Shabunin's relationship, again, to it? Mr. Sherenby runs the center, and what does Mr. Shabunin do?
Together, they funded this anti-corruption center, and for the view of the investigative journalists, they controlled the funds of that center together.
And what was Shabunin's connection to the National Center for AIDS, the all Ukrainian network?
And there's no straight connection. The main idea was that the Anti-Corruption Center had to control the money and the funds from international donors and from outside to this HIV center.
And is that the subject of legislation? Is there a law or regulation that says that ANTAC should review it?
No, it's a recommendation when they give foreign technical assistance to organization.
I see. And Sherenby is also part of ANTAC. Is that correct?
He was the funder of that anti-corruption center.
So, altogether, in this document, the allegation is that there's 133 million, almost 134 million dollars that was transferred to various vendors and contractors and many, and that there is not proper documentation for it. It was for purposes that were not intended, and in some cases was laundered. I mean, the whole host of reasons why it was improperly dealt with. Is that what is outlined here with these charts? Money that was inappropriately distributed to these vendors?
Part of the funds were spent appropriately, and the other part of funds was spent on effective companies and laundered. And also to companies which had cases open against them for stealing and theft.
Now, this document that I'm holding here is a certificate, and it lists, again, $134 million. That's questionable, not accounted for properly, raises suspicions about money laundering or raises suspicions about overpricing. Who prepared this document, this certificate that goes into detail on the inappropriate spending?
The problem of technical assistance and assistance to the medical sphere was numerous times investigated prior already. And there were different criminal cases opened. The majority of those cases were closed from the orders from the top. But the materials of those cases were still there.
Voice of God? The voice of, it was the voice of God that...
Fortunately not from God, but from there.
Not, we don't want to take the name of God in vain. So they were fixed. The cases were fixed, is what you're telling me.
Part of those cases were closed, but documents were still there.
I see.
And the journalists received those documents from the investigators who were investigating those cases.
And who were the prosecutors assigned to? Who were NABU or NABU?
Those documents were from the prosecutor's office. The prosecutors gave those documents to the journalists.
And this compilation here, who did this? Who prepared this compilation of questionable, improper
This
corruption?
chart was in the case. It's probably from the case.
And who entered this certificate? Who wrote this certificate? This here. Who wrote this?
It was somebody who was working on that case.
I see. So this comes from the file of the prosecutor?
From prosecutor give to the journalist give us.
I see. And tell us about the background of Mr. Sharon Bey. What does he do? What does he do for a living? What kind of past has he had?
The information on him is in open sources. He already 4 times was in prison. He was 4 times convicted. He had a really difficult life. And then he started to fight corruption. At the beginning, he started to fight corruption together with Shaburin, and then he started to redistribute the foreign technical assistance.
And this, so back in, I believe it was in the 1990s, in the early 2000s, he was actually convicted of grand larceny, theft, and at least 4 separate convictions. And he was in jail, correct? And then when he came out of jail, that's when he set up both the All-Ukrainian Network and ANTAC, the anti-corruption. So, and that original ANTAC was funded in part by George Soros.
Yes, partially that money was given from source organizations for anti-corruption.
And part of it came from, do you know where else?
From the U.S. government.
The government of the U.S. And do you know which of the 2 organizations started first? The All-Ukrainian Network for HIV/AIDS, or ANTAC, the Anti-Corruption Network?
At first, the AIDS organization was funded, and then in 2012, the ANTAC, Center for Fighting Corruption.
And part of the reason for setting up ANTAC was to have theoretically, to have a check on expenditures like, in particular, the All-Ukrainian Network.
Yes, it's more convenient that way.
So they set up ANTAC in order to basically audit and determine that expenditures of this foreign aid was proper. And have they ever done that? Have they ever submitted a report or an analysis or?
Unfortunately, on majority of those programs, the 20 cases that I gave to you, there is no right accountability or audits done. And this is a problem.
So if I understand it correctly, Mr. Sharon Bey is what we would call the common denominator. He runs the All-Ukrainian Network that handles hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars. Is that right? He runs that, but he also was the founder of the corruption organization that was going to oversee his spending. And that didn't occur to anyone that's a conflict of interest?
He, a year and a half ago, left this anti-corruption organization.
But all during the time that this money was being spent, because this goes back to what, 2000, and tell me what years these go back to. What period of time are we talking about here?
It's a period of time, I'll have to be more concrete, it's a period of time from 2015, 2017.
Here. So he was at that time part of the organization. He was
in 2015, as I remember, he was still the founder, but he was part of the all anti-corruption programs.
So he was
more than that. He was the board member who oversaw NABU.
Not the head member of the board of NABU.
so-called supervisor Naboo.
So he, for an ex-convict, he played a lot of roles. So he ran the all Ukrainian network that distributed hundreds of millions of dollars. Correct?
Yes.
He was a founder of the organization that in part was founded in order to determine whether expenditures like that were accountable. ANTAC.
Da.
And then he was also involved with the special prosecutors, investigators, the investigators that did corruption investigations, NABU, is that correct?
Not exactly. In Naboo, we had an overseeing board, and he was a member of that board which oversees the actions of Naboo.
And he was also a member of the supervisory board of the investigators. Of the investigators.
Yes, 4 times convicted.
So he was part.
He was 4 times in prison and become after the.
Yeah, but that's the point I'm making. He was 4 times in prison for theft. He starts an AIDS organization. There are questions about expenditures. So this ANTAC is set up, and he's part of the outside agency that's supposed to oversee him. And then he's also on the board of the governmental investigators. So he basically controlled, he had his finger everywhere. His finger in every.
Problem is that also the Ukrainians and the U.S. taxpayers are being lied to. My job as a member of parliament is to stop this process. So
Now,
that there will be clarity in the distribution of funds. And the most important part is that it has to be effective. That's why we brought to you those 20 cases. Because on our own, we won't be able to investigate them. Part of those companies are American.
So something like, not just this, but all of the different examples you gave us, they're going to have to be investigated from the point of view of Ukraine and also the United States.
Yes, we need a joint international investigation.
And so, I know this is the conclusion, but we might as well raise it now. And your recommendation, if I remember correctly, is that a task force should be established so that both the U.S. and the Ukrainian investigators can investigate cases like this together.
Yes, so we would bring order and the technical foreign assistance. Because we really need that aid. And we are grateful to the United States for that help. It doesn't have to be spent on parties, on champagne, on Xeroxes and copying machines, and it has to be spent on real issues.
134 million that's in question. Was that their entire budget, or did they have more money beyond that?
Right now, we were investigating only this case.
But the point is that the money in question, was that their entire budget for those 2 years, or was that just part of their budget?
It was only a part of their budget.
So they had additional amounts of money in addition to this that could or could not have been spent correctly. Nobody's looking at that right now.
Yes, and I gave you the investigation of one of the journalists on this topic.
And there is no evidence that you can see that ANTAC conducted an investigation of them at any time?
It was registered and then it was closed.
But I'm asking about ANTAC now, not the government. ANTAC is supposed to oversee them. Is there any evidence of reports, investigations done by ANTAC?
No, there's only a statement. And as soon as somebody's trying to investigate them, then these two people, Shernbey and Shabunin, are starting to announce that it's a pressuring on democracy. And before, the U.S. Embassy in Kiev would interact right away. And today, thank God, it's quiet and nobody's interfering.
So the answer to the question is that ANTAC never conducted, there's no evidence that ANTAC ever conducted an investigation. They reacted to investigations being conducted by others. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Now, there are a couple of particular cases you were making reference to, just so people can understand, some examples. There's a company called Farmasco, which received $2.7 million. I think it's $2.7 million. And Farmasco is a defendant in criminal proceedings for overstating the cost of acquiring goods and medicine, and for failing to register the financial and economic transactions with enterprises, and also for doing business with fictitious enterprises. That's a lot of charges. And they gave that company $2.7 million. The allegation is that was substantially overcharged. Is that right?
Right.
And right now, Farmasco itself is being investigated separately, both for its dealings with the All-Ukrainian Network and for other violations.
Yes, this is what I talked about, that most of the companies that the money was given to, they were already under investigation.
And
The next example is Optima Farm.
Optima Farm Limited, it says here, repeatedly involved in criminal proceedings, creating a shadow and corrupt scheme to conceal the real value of medicines, with the aim of seizing budget funds, and the significantly higher prices would then be corruptly diverted. Is that right?
It's all that you could find open sources.
You filed a document in which you laid out those examples and then a number of others. This is the document that you, Mr. Derkach, filed, requesting an investigation.
Yes, that's why we said that this has to be investigated. And as soon as this investigation started, there was a lot of pressure from Shibunin and Sharon Bay because of this investigation.
And this investigation specifically involves as the focus of the investigation both Sharon Bay and Shibunin, and it alleges that they organized a scheme for embezzlement of international technical funds. That basically a conspiracy.
Because it's what our journalist investigators think. And this is the opinion from the prosecutors who gave that documents to our journalists, investigators.
And one of the specifications that you have in this that goes beyond the other one is this one here for 5.3, almost 5.4 million to a company called, and you can probably pronounce that better than I can, Svitlo Nadi NGO.
Svitlo Nadi. Yes, it's an NGO.
And in this particular case, they're supposed to care for internally displaced persons. And according to the complaint here, it was found that any of the internally displaced persons received no real financial assistance, and the funds were transferred to the accounts of shell individual entrepreneurs.
It's a real scheme and how foreign technical assistance is being laundered from Ukraine today. And not only in this case, but in the other 20 cases, they use almost the same scheme to launder the money.
And
it's because you pay less taxes there.
This document here, which goes through some of the same things, this is a document that was prepared by Yevgeny Filandash.
He is former Ukrainian parliament.
Former Ukrainian parliament, and now
is a political expert.
So this is based on his investigation. And here he points out that the 5.3 billion that was put in question by the audit in 2017, that is roughly 1/8 of the state budget.
Here he says that part of funds which was given, they're also partially funds from the state budget.
This allegation from him involves very similar allegations against the All-Ukrainian Network, and also the Alliance for Public Health.
In his investigation, he gives an example on how the funds are being distributed and spent. In his investigation, he gives examples on how the money is being misused. And what Mr. Fildash is saying is that most of those funds were spent through the companies which are affiliated with the United States. And in the second part, for example, where they have an issue about Deloitte.
Yes. Before we get to that, there's a chart that involves the All-Ukrainian Network. And the allegations are that these expenditures, for example, for airline tickets,
Computer equipment, translation, consultation, methodological work, translations, program assistance, audit, catering, hotels, office supplies.
and millions of dollars were spent on that. Millions of dollars were spent on that. And now it says here at the end that the green light for travel, flights, hotels was paid in currency, and it was given by the executive director of the All-Ukrainian Network of People Living with HIV/AIDS, Anastasia Dieva.
Anastasia Dieva, yes.
And she's married to Georgy Dev. Is that his name?
That's just the last name of her husband.
Is there any significance to that? I mean, is he a political figure? Or?
She worked as a deputy minister for a short period of time.
And she had a troubled situation there when she was the deputy minister of the Interior?
Yes, but I wouldn't want to interfere in that. It was some inappropriate situation.
It's not a story you want to tell about her.
It's her private own story.
Problematic in that it's not true, or problematic in that it's embarrassing?
It's an embarrassing story because her photos went online. Her personal private photos went online.
More than one? More than one, or just one?
A lot of them.
A lot of pictures where she appears to be a drug addict.
I cannot say that.
Now, Mr. Shirembi has already been involved with the law many times. Back in the early 2000s, at least 4 convictions for theft in large amounts. But in 2017, he was alleged to have purchased medicines at inflated prices for money kickbacks from the Global Fund. And then that case was closed. Was there ever a proper investigation of that?
I think during the period of time when the Poroshenko government was in place, it was impossible to investigate such sort of cases.
It was not possible? It was not investigated, in other words?
Because those issues are connected with 4 technical assistants, and they were coordinated by somebody within the U.S. Embassy.
And they would stop some of these investigations?
Yes, they would just close the cases.
Beyond, I mean, we know about the situation where Antonovich told Lutsenko that he had to drop the case on ANTAC, which is the organization that is supposed to oversee these funds. But are there other situations where cases were dropped?
Yes, I've heard about this. I cannot confirm the whole truth of that story, but the prosecutors and the police officers who investigated these cases of technical foreign assistance, they told to many journalists that they were blocked from investigating such cases.
Now, the funds for the National Center in part come from USAID and also the Renaissance Foundation. Who runs the Renaissance Foundation?
The Renaissance Foundation is the Soros Fund.
That's George. That's how George Soros made his investment in
Most of the programs which are financed by the USAID are also financed by Soros. When I came to work as a member of parliament the last time, on my table I was given a big booklet, and from one side it was said USAID, from the other side it was said the Soros Fund, Renaissance, and recommendations for the member of parliament. And it was really pricey paper. It was made all on very expensive paper.
Very
Expensive quality paper, quality expensive print. And all members of parliament received such book, and all were laughing in the parliament.
So the U.S. government, USAID, and Soros co-invested in these projects. Is that right?
In many other projects.
Not just Antac.
Not only in that.
Now,
with the programs of Internews is the same case. Partly such programs are financed by USAID, partially by Soros Foundation, partially by the European Initiative for Fighting Corruption. Journalists also investigated this activity, and also the European Anti-Corruption Initiative, where the money are being distributed improperly.
Now, according to this document, Mr. Philindash's document, the misappropriated funds are approximately 143 million. That's about 10 million more than is alleged in the
I think he's using the data which is added on after 2017. And also he has another scheme which is being used by Deloitte and Touche, which is, we can see it here in the papers.
This is a separate case.
Yes, for the 23 million.
This is a case of 23 million. And according to the allegation, part of the money was laundered simply through private entrepreneurs without any intended use and with no reporting. Would this be another situation that Antac was supposed to oversee?
Everybody has to pay attention to this. $200,000 was spent for laptops and cell phones. $3.5 million for publications and postal services.
And this organization, what was its function? What was it supposed to do?
This is a program about nothing.
It's a program about nothing. So $22 million was spent on 23 million.
There's a lot of these programs. If you open up and see the cases, there's a lot of these programs for $70 million. If you open up and look at the cases, you can see by the name that the program is about nothing. It's an example, the influence of wind on the democracy in Ukraine. $70 million for that.
Pardon me? You have to say that again, because that.
When you can see it by the names of those programs. They are about nothing. The program about adding up confidence in yourself.
It's a program to help people to be more self-confident. And how much money roughly was spent on making people self-confident?
I gave you that document. How much it was worth.
Does it work?
How much it was worth. How much it was worth. We're going to see right now. For example, democratic arrangement and development in Ukraine. Democratic regulation in Ukraine. $57 million.
So the $57 million was spent on helping people to be more on an organization that theoretically is supposed to help people be more self-confident.
In this case, on teaching how the local governments work. Or the competitive economics of Ukraine, $41 million. And the self-confident program, $36 million.
$76 million was...
$36 million.
$36 million. Let's make sure we get this correct now.
These programs are run by Shimonix International.
So the program you're describing to us is a program to build confidence among citizens and give them a transformation process in a constructive way And this,
$36 million spent. This program is already finished.
that was $36,510,000 done by the Shamanics company. They were given that amount of money for strategic communication to have people build their confidence.
How can you
Как это посчитать?
count all that? What kind of result do you have to receive out of this $36 million? Just spent money and that's it.
Well, I mean, as long as we're talking about shamanics, it's also alleged that in 2015, USAID allocated shamanics $9.5 billion for a program to prevent and treat HIV, AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. And it was reported in 2017 that only 7% of the supplies of medical products were delivered under this program and arrived on time and in full. This is the same company, Shamanics?
This company is working in different other countries, but we are interested mainly in Ukraine. And once again, in our country, this company is doing programs, for example, $41 million, second program, $57 million, and the completed program, $36 million,
And the Shamanics
additional $20 million, and one more other program, $21 million.
and this company is an American company or a Ukrainian company?
It's an American company.
And it's run by someone named Thurston Teal.
This is what we can find in open sources.
Oh, David Snellbecker is the CEO,
David Sandberg.
and it was founded by Thurston Teal. And David Snellbecker, the CEO of Shamanics, is close to Senator Biden, then Senator Biden, Joe Biden.
This is from open sources. This is what the journalists are providing to us.
So we discussed today the all Ukrainian network for HIV/AIDS, Mr. Sheremby and Mr. Sabunin, and their involvement in diverting and improperly handling about 133 million. That case is actively under investigation now.
Yes, the police is investigating that case.
The other cases that we talked about, like Shamanics and the 20 that are in the chart, those are cases that are going to have to be investigated. They're not being investigated right now, but they're on a list to be investigated. So that's going to be quite a long job. And I'd like to ask you, as we conclude, what your recommendation is for the best way to get these cases investigated, particularly since they involve, in many cases, large amounts of American money.
From our side, we will, as members of parliaments, we will send requests and official letters to get official information into our hands.
But I also ask you, since you're here, when President Trump raised this question about American aid and the use of American aid with President Zelensky, how was that reported in Ukraine, and what was the reaction to that?
We have a new government in Ukraine. They have been in power for less than a year. They're trying to understand what's going on in the situation. Because the system for stealing international technical assistance was their place for many, many years. And when President Trump said we want to investigate, find out what's going on, he was correct and right. Why do U.S. taxpayers have to pay money for nothing? And why do the Ukrainian citizens don't receive real help, but only some fiction? There has to be a very strict control and audit. And there has to be a report on the effectiveness of such help. Because we can make up different programs. As I said, as a joke, the influence of wind on the democracy of Ukraine, and we can spend $70 million on such program.
Well, Mr. Durkash, you've raised some very, very important issues. And I really am very encouraged by the fact that these investigations are being taken so seriously, and a lot of that has to do with you. So for the American people, I thank you for being conscious of the expenditures of our taxpayers' dollars, and also for your own people, because they're not getting by any means the full benefit of the money that we're giving them. So thank you very much.
Thank you for assistance and for a good job for the people of Ukraine. Yeah.
Well, this was, of course, an interview with Andrei Durkash, who's a member of RADA, and as you can see throughout the interview, a person very, very concerned with the expenditure of funds, particularly our American funds, and whether they're used properly, and very concerned about the fact that they're used properly because they're supposed to be helping people. And in fact, large amounts, in this case 133 million or 142 million, whichever figure you use, was not properly accounted for, diverted, laundered, or flew off into the wind. But it didn't get to people and it didn't get to help people. That's an extraordinary amount of money. The two people involved are Mr. Sherembi and Mr. Sabunin, and we'll see what happens with the investigation. But this is a very, very significant development and a very good sign that the Ukrainian government is beginning to become a lot more accountable. So again, we'll be back with you in a little while for another episode, but I think this has been very enlightening for the American people. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Please subscribe to our backup channels, Net4Truth USA 2 Patriot channel, BitChute.com/net4Truth USA, and drop.space /@Net4Truth USA. We fly so close to the target, we are on our 5th fighter jet. We will be relentless and persistent until the enemies of freedom are defeated. You can support this channel by using the links in the description, but for a $100 donation, I will personally send you a autographed hardcover special edition copy of Land of Childhood's Fears. Also, visit my bookstore at lulu.com/Net4Truth USA. If you are viewing this video on BitChute, you can use the links in the description to support us, or simply click the green $ dot on our video to support this channel. Thank you. Links are in the description section.